the House Committee on Elections to order. And our first order of business is request for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions? Representative? Nope.
Years I've been in the legislature, I have noticed that from time to time, I have questioned myself whether a legislator should be voting on something or not, and I believe we can sometimes get by with pushing present, but most of the time people just do whatever because we don't have anything in our statute. So I'm coming today to introduce to you RS 2320, it's 24 RS 2320, sorry, which is a bill that would add conflict of interest, legislators to a conflict of interest statute that's in existence on other ethics and elections matters. So that's it.
Are there any questions for the representative about the bill? Are there any objections to the introduction of this bill? Okay, seeing no objections, your bill's introduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll leave a copy.
Okay. All right, are there any other bill introductions? Ms. Borchard. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Proctor, and lots of familiar faces. And I've been in this room several times, but I've never done a bill introduction. So you are teaching an old dog new tricks. I would like to introduce 24 RS 2527. This is a bill that specifically pertains to carving out the qualifications for poll workers. Currently, what we have in the state of Kansas is that if you are a military family and you are not registered to vote here, if your spouse wanted to volunteer to be a poll worker, she wouldn't be allowed. Well, you may be serving overseas to keep us safe. Also included in that is on a full-time basis regarding our college kids. My son goes to school at Liberty University, but he is registered to vote in Kansas. And I said, hey, you need to make sure you help at the polls. He goes, Mom, I can't, because I'm not registered to vote in Virginia. So we all know there's a real need for poll workers. This is not a broad, open component to this issue. It's a carve out for what makes sense, as we need more poll workers as we're going to a very important election cycle. So,
for the record, can you give your name and your title just so we can...
I apologize. I made an assumption.
No problem.
My name is Kim Borchers, and I am here as a Kansas citizen.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Borchers? Representative Miller.
I'm not sure what the statute is that's being referenced. We've had our election officers use poll workers that were actually less than 18 years old. Mm-hmm. That's allowed, but these other categories are not.
Well, I know when I just looked at Virginia's statute, they actually allow 16-year-olds, but you have to be present with a registered adult. So someone who is registered to vote in that city can participate.
The statute right now says you have to be a registered Kansas voter. And so a lot of folks, especially in military installations, they're, because of the SCRA, they're residents of other states. And so this just makes it allowable for them, those specific folks, to work as poll workers.
That's why I love this place. There's always something to learn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for Ms. Borchers? Okay, are there any objections to this bill being introduced? Okay, seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you very much for coming to the committee.
Thank you. I appreciate each of you.
Are there any other bill introductions? Please. I forgot to say this to the last conferee. Please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
Not a problem. Chairman Proctor, other members of the committee, good afternoon. I'm Dan Burrows. I'm the Chief Deputy Attorney General. I'm here on behalf of the Attorney General to request an introduction of 24 RS 2679. This is a bill that would amend KSA 25-2438, which is the impersonating election official statute, to fix some issues that we've had come up in recent litigation. the court probably fairly pointed out that there were some ambiguities in there. We think this would handle them.
Right. Are there any questions? Okay, are there any objections to this bill being introduced? Okay, seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you very much for coming to the committee. Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clay Barker, the Counsel for the Secretary of State. I have 3 bills to introduce. They're not election bills, but because House Judiciary is not meeting, I'll introduce them here and the Speaker will reassign them. The 3 bills are 24 RS 2560, which has to do with corporate filings, 24 RS 2585, which concerns the publication of regulations, and 24 RS 2589, which cleans up some minor problems with the 5-year regulation review.
All right, are there any questions on any of these bills? And we spoke ahead of time. This is not going to be heard in this committee, but they're trying to get it into the pipeline because we've only got 3 weeks left of committee hearings before we're on the floor for turnaround. So seeing no questions, are there any objections to these bills being introduced? Okay, without objections, the bills are introduced. Thank you. Are there any other bill introductions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our next order of business. I'll open the hearing on House Bill 2512, and I'd ask Revisor Heim to give us a brief overview.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Heim with the Revisor of Statutes Office. This bill amends a couple of statutes dealing with advanced voting, and it makes some changes dealing with in-person voting, which you've got advanced voting by mail, you've got somebody that can carry in an advanced ballot and hand it, and this is a situation where you actually show up in the clerk's office or a satellite and vote ahead of time. And if you look on page 3, current law basically provides that the deadline is noon on Monday preceding the election, and what this would provide is 7 p.m. on the second day preceding the election. If you look in lines 22 and 23, that's where the change is made. So it would require the person that wants to vote in person before the election day would have to do it by Sunday at 7 p.m. There is a change made on page 6 and 7. Again, we're doing essentially the same thing. So.
Are there any questions for the revisers? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Heim. I do not have any proponents listed to testify. Is there anybody wishing to speak as a proponent on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to neutral testimony, and my first conferee is Mr. Clay Barker from the Secretary of State's office. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Secretary of State is neutral on this bill because it doesn't affect our office directly. It affects the counties. Briefly, the background right now is on the Monday before Election Tuesday, county election offices have to have in-person voting up until noon. And this can create a problem at counties where people are trying to vote at the same time the county election staff is trying to prepare for Election Day on Tuesday. In small counties that only have 2 or 3 staff members, they're peeling people off to handle voters while they're loading up equipment. Johnson County, for instance, is having trucks come in to load up equipment for more than 100 polling places while they're also trying to get people to vote, and people are dropping off. And I believe the intent of the bill is to relieve that pressure on the county election office on Monday. In 2023, the legislature did partially recognize this problem and no longer requires the in-person voting on Monday to be done at the county election office. That may be a benefit for the bigger counties that can split off staff. Our 2 concerns with this is, one, I think the obvious, that some voters, especially in a presidential year that only vote in the November presidential election, may not realize this is a change. Some voters just vote on Monday out of habit. Our specific concern was the language at the end of the bill that says that not later than 7 p.m. on the second day preceding the date of the election, so 7 p.m. before the election, in-person delivery must end. And we weren't sure how that affected ballots that came in by Dropbox or ballots that came in on election day that were mail ballots that were just put in the bag at the election, at the polling places. We don't think this bill meant to affect those, but it could. And Mr. Chair, that's the end of my testimony. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Well, since we don't have many in-person conferees, we'll go ahead and do questions for each conferee, but please, we got 2 bills to hear, so please be succinct. Are there any questions for Mr. Barker? Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The only thing that kind of caught my eye here, I guess, is language. When we say the second day proceeding, you know, the only time we say second day is usually going to the right, not going backwards. So the preferred language would probably be 2 days prior with Sunday in parentheses. And I don't know if we need to make an amendment on that when it comes time, but this is just very awkward language that might confuse people.
Okay. All right, Representative Oropeza, and then Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so my question would be, would the election offices have to be open then on Sunday?
Representative, that's not required by the bill. I mean, that would be up to the counties, and I heard there may be an amendment that requires the county election offices to be open on Saturday to make sure, but that's not specifically laid out in the bill as we read it.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think when I look at this, one of my greater concerns is how many people we lose in the elective process, because we've done this for so many years. Now, can we change? Yes, but, excuse me. Doing this in an election year, I think long-term, this just shortens the time that allows people to do what they're normally used to. I think there are some unanswered issues in this as far as who's going to be open Saturday or Sunday. I think some more research might need to be done on this, and I didn't hear a lot of complaints from most of the county commissioners on this particular issue. I know Johnson County and Douglas County and stuff said they were busy, but they didn't say it was a major problem of any sort.
Thank you, Representative. And again, we're neutral on this bill.
Right.
I believe the counties that have the biggest problem are the smaller ones that only have 2 or 3 staff, as opposed to a Johnson County, which has enough people, it can probably divide into 2 teams, election day prep and early voting on Monday. But that's my understanding.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to our second neutral conferee, Mr. Rick Pifo, Harvey County Clerk, and I believe we have him on WebEx, is that correct? Whenever you're ready, Mr. Pifo.
Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can, we're turning you up now, so we got you, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for letting me testify via WebEx. I was in Topeka the last couple of days, but wasn't able to hang around today. I'm Rick Pifo, and I am the Harvey County Clerk and Chair of the Elections Committee for the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association, and I'm testifying on behalf of the association today. We are neutral on this, but I'm confident or sure that if you talk to your individual election officer or county clerk, they would state that they would appreciate having reducing the workload on Monday, when that's already a pretty busy day, as Clay stated, with deliveries. There's also you have to wait until the polls close at noon before you can prepare the final poll books for election day. So, like I said, I'm sure they would appreciate that. We do also appreciate the allowing us the option to be open on Sunday. I'm not sure how many counties would actually exercise that option, but it's nice to be able to do that. I would like to point out, though, that at least in my county, I know the numbers from my county, and I think they're similar for others. 10% of our total in-person voters, or about 10% of our total in-person voters, vote in that 4-hour period on Monday. In my county, we're open 10 days total. 8 of those days are 9-hour days, and then we're also open on the Saturday for 5 hours, and then 4 hours on the Monday. So, like I said, 10% are voting on that day. Now, I think, those voters could learn to vote on different days, but as was pointed out, this being a presidential year, I'm not sure this year is the best time to do that. I would also like to point out, as Clay mentioned about the changes in the second statute regarding the delivery of, there's a statement in there that says all advanced voting ballots returned by personal delivery shall be delivered to the election office no later than 7 p.m. on the second day proceeding. That statement, to me, conflicts directly with KSA 251132, which allows delivery of mailed advance ballots to the election office or polling place on election day. So I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but otherwise I would stand for questions when appropriate.
Are there any questions for Mr. Pifo? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Pifo. You've been very, very helpful in the discussions that we've had this past week and on election information. I do appreciate the fact that you have the number down to about 10% of those that vote on Monday, and that's just in your area. As I say, I do believe that this being an election year, that it is so large that one of the other things you could have would be extremely long lines on voting day when people couldn't express their election options up until the day, until Monday. But I think 10% is a large number. Now, yes, he comes from a smaller area, but if I put 10% in my area that did that, and I don't know that to be true, could be more, could be less, that would be a lot of votes that would not be counted. And so I'm not quite sure that this is the year to introduce something of this magnitude. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Pifo.
Thank you.
Representative Dodson, and then the minority leader. Is he first? Oh, okay. I apologize. Mr. Minority Leader.
Well, I do want to say that I think the last point Mr. Pifo made is a serious drafting error that needs to be corrected to eliminate the confusion. I've never understood the mentality of these people that have so much time to vote early and wait till the morning before election day to run in and stand in a long line to do that. Lines that are here a lot longer than any line they would be standing in when they voted the very next day. So I'm not so concerned about that group of probably fairly called procrastinators. What I am concerned about, and first I have a question. It's been a while since I revisited these processes, but do we still have a process for what we call sick and disabled voters that actually allows an application before noon on election day with the return of the ballot before the end of the day? Is that still available? And that is limited to people that are indeed at the last minute perhaps hospitalized and can't make it to the polls when they had planned to do so.
Correct.
That's still available.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the people that I wanted to focus on that I am concerned about are, as an example, a truck driver who gets called out on the road the day before the election, and the only opportunity they then have to vote is to go in on that Monday and do so. But I don't have the bill in front of me, but as I understand it, there are no exceptions that would allow for such an event. Is that correct? Mr.
That's
Heim?
correct.
Do you agree, Mr. Heim? So if this bill passed, the truck driver that got called out on Sunday night had to hit the road the next day would not be able to vote. Is that fair? Mr. Pipo?
Correct.
Mr. Barker?
The way I understand it.
Okay. Please identify yourself for the record for the.
Brian Caskey, Director of Elections for Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Representative Miller, you are correct. Under current law, someone who is unable to vote after the proposed 7 p.m. on Sunday deadline would only be able to vote a provisional ballot that would not end up counting because they're outside of the law.
All right, well, I don't know if this bill, I notice, has an overwhelming amount of support from its proponents, so I don't know if it's going to get worked or not, but if it does get worked, I hope that voter is kept in mind.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Pivo? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick, the question I have, how many actual days of early voting do you have in Harvey County in general? Is it like 2 weeks, 10 days? How many days?
In Harvey County, we're open for a total of 10 days. We always start the 2 weeks before every election.
Okay. Okay, so in one sense, the Monday, I mean, 10% of your total early vote, that's almost identical to your average vote on the other days, would it not be?
Correct. We have more in that 4-hour period than we do on a number of the other 9-hour days that we're open.
Okay. I do have a second question, something I actually hadn't thought of earlier, but the Secretary of State's office mentioned that last year, and I could not pin the bill to you, that we no longer require that Monday in-person voting happens. So if it's not required, are you aware of any counties that have opted out? I mean, just from in your discussions with county election clerks.
No, I think what he was stating, or Brian can clarify, or Clay can clarify, but I think what he was stating was it used to be required that on Monday, the early voting could only happen in the clerk's office. Whereas all the other days you could have satellite or other locations. And that part.
Mr. Barker, did that cover your concern that you wanted to? He was waving frantically when the question was.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, that was about the location of the early voting. It didn't change the requirement for early voting on Monday.
It is still currently required then. I mean, okay.
Okay, so the Vice Chairman stole my first point, which is if you do early voting 10 days, I acknowledge your point that it's a shorter day and everybody's rushing to vote on that last day, but you should have an average 10% on every one of those days, so I won't belabor that. But I'm equally concerned that we were taking away 4 hours of the opportunity to vote from voters. And so, Mr. Pivo, if we were to require 4 hours on Saturday to make up for these 4 hours on Monday that we're not requiring clerks to be open, or not allowing clerks to be open by the way it's written now, would you as a clerk yourself and would your association be okay with that?
Personally, I would be okay with it. My normal is we're open 2 weeks before we start 2 weeks before every election, and we open from 9 to 2 on the Saturday preceding the election. We've done that for a number of years in Harvey County. I don't know the numbers on how many counties are currently open on Saturday, but I think a lot of them are different hours. Some may be only open for a couple hours, but a lot of them do offer Saturday voting.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Pivo? Representative Hoagland.
That 10% of the vote on Monday, is that 10% of all the voters or 10% of the early vote?
It's 10% of the people that vote early in person.
Okay, thank you.
All Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll move along. Thank you very much for appearing, Mr. Pifo. I don't have any other neutrals listed. Is there anybody else wishing to testify as a neutral on this bill? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to the opponents. And our first conferee is Ms. Seal King from the League of Women Voters via WebEx. Welcome to the committee, Ms. King.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, ma'am.
All right. I'm Seal King. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Kansas, and we do oppose this bill just simply because it reduces the number of days that are required for early voting. And according to Mr. Pifo, that's 10% in his county. I'll make my testimony short. We did consider a compromise. We do understand that some of the rural counties don't have any weekend voting. And so in order to make it a little fairer for those people who learn at the last minute that they can't vote on the Tuesday election day, which might be the day that they really prefer to vote, we ask that we make Saturday voting mandatory for all counties so that some of those last minute voters can cast their ballot. And maybe it's longer than 4 hours. Maybe it's 9 to 2 or 9 to 3, something written in statute similar to what we have right now, saying they need to be open until noon on Monday. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Ms. King? Okay, so Ms. King, I take to heart the comments by one of the representatives that we're making a change in an election year. If we were to move the effective date of this back to 2025 rather than 2024, and we were to add that Saturday voting, would the League of Women Voters then be at least not in opposition to this?
I believe you're right. I think holding it off another year would be advised. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Ms. King? Representative Oropeza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this is necessarily for Mrs. King, but how many counties don't have Saturday voting prior to the election, early voting?
Representative, I think we could have the legislative research and the Secretary of State's office try to run down that number. I don't think we have it right now. I know, and please, if you're watching my county clerk and I'm wrong, I apologize, but I believe my county, which is not a rural county, we're an urban county, Leavenworth County, we don't have Saturday voting before the election. I think that in years past they have done that occasionally, but it's not the norm. And as I went around talking to counties around the state, a lot of the rural counties just don't have the bandwidth to do it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms. King? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for talking to us today. Our next opponent in person is Davis Hammett from Loudlight. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This can be quite brief because actually a lot of my concerns have already been highlighted about the conflicting statute this would make for returning your ballot, mail ballot, to a poll site on election day. Another concern that's technical in nature is how it says 7 p.m., the second day proceeding, which is quite confusing language. But it seems to say that if there was to be Sunday in-person early voting, that it wouldn't be able to go till 7 o'clock because the ballots have to be to the county election office by 7 p.m., meaning they would have to close with enough time to shut down the facility and transport the ballots. One other thing that just might be helpful to the committee is to put a face on this. So I have voted early on Monday in 2022 here in Shawnee County, and I ran into former Governor Sam Brownback, who was also using that Monday right before the election to vote. So all types and stripes of people might utilize that. As was mentioned, they find out that on the Tuesday they're going to be unavailable, and so they go in. I do understand the concern of county clerks of having to put that on in their office and the administrative burden. But, you know, as I seem to hear a consensus building here that if hours, mandatory hours are going to be taken away, they need to be put back somewhere else. And ideally on a weekend, you know, a Saturday or Sunday, because also for a lot of counties right now that only do early voting, really on business hours during the weekday, you can think of a variety of people who can't utilize that. And election day is also complicated, you know, workers, school administrators, what have you. And it's such a disadvantage for voters that live in counties that don't provide any evening or weekend early voting opportunities. So that'd be something to look at. And thank you so much for hearing my testimony. And we oppose this bill as written. I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hammett? So I'll ask you the same question I asked Ms. King. If we were to add those mandatory hours on that Saturday, if we were to move this back to 25 and we were to clear up the confusion about mail-in ballots, would your organization then be in support? I mean, I'm pinning you to language you haven't seen, but if philosophically you wouldn't be opposed, or would you still be opposed?
Conceptually, I think we could be okay with it. Again, it would be about the hours and really taking some time to research and think about unique situations that people will face. As it was said, though, on delays, I do want to mention as well, one of the issues you're going to have, you know, we have media in the room, is that you might have a situation where you pass this bill, and even though it's not going to be implemented till later, people see a news headline. And so they assume something has already gone into law that actually doesn't go into effect till later. So something else to consider, and has been done with some election bills in the past, is to include an education component. For example, that all counties sort of notify the voters, you know, in some way, and sometimes the associated funding to pay for a mailer to notify voters how things are changing in their county.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Hammett? Representative Berquist.
You know, in your consideration of voting and voting days and the amount of voting and what you do, in consideration of what the chair just mentioned as far as the Saturday, would people be clearer if they heard the Saturday before the election day rather than a number of days before the election day?
Oh, as far as the clarity, I mean, absolutely, right? I think anyone who read this bill was like, wait, second day proceeding, I kind of like map it out and just strike it out and write Sunday on it to know what we were talking about. So yes, I think it's true that both in public facing information, it's important to be as clear as possible. But frankly, you have, and I'm sure you all have experienced this as candidates, you're reading an election statute and it just kind of becomes so convoluted that you have to ask someone to, like, you know, also read it with you and give you feedback on it. So, you know, as clear as we can make Kansas election law, I think is a service to everyone from the candidate to the citizen.
Thanks, sir.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Hammett? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Davis. And I guess my question would be, providing this information to the general public and having a year to get that information discerned with any changes that are made, do you see that as giving more confidence to the voter so they know ahead of time? Because so much of this, people talk about transparency and have we notified people and do they trust us? Do you think with these changes, if they were made, would create that transparency and give more trust in the election process itself? Because that's ultimately what our goal is. How we get there, though, I think we also have to be very careful that in doing so, we don't cause more confusion and less trust because it's too complicated now to read. Thank you.
Yes, so, wow, there's a lot there that I could go off of, but I think what I was sort of pointing to about this, about the danger of passing election statutes that don't take effect for a while, is I really think back to the Vote Anywhere law in Sedgwick that was focused on Sedgwick County. But a lot of Kansans saw these headlines about you're going to be able to vote at, any polling site in your county on election day, but that was never actually implemented. And in fact, to this day, no county has ever implemented that. And the commissioner at the time, Tabitha Lehman, I had talked to her about that, and they had an issue of some voters showing up and not understanding that they couldn't actually vote anywhere, right? Because it was like the law was passed, and everyone assumed that meant it was in effect, but it wasn't going to take effect until later. And so that was my concern with this, is just maybe people seeing, oh, now Kansas is going to mandate Saturday voting. You live in a county that's never offered it. You show up at the election office on Saturday just to realize you can't vote.
So that's a great observation. If we were to mandate the Saturday voting, I would want to talk to the clerks before I just did this, because I'm very reluctant about mandates unless there's an overriding concern, public concern. But maybe we mandate the Saturday this year, and then we don't take away the Monday till the next year. And so you don't have that situation, because the people who heard Saturday, they show up on Saturday. The people who heard Monday's gone just don't show up because they heard Monday's gone, even though it is. So maybe that's a way to.
And I think that's even confusing when you go, well, it's Saturday this year, won't be Monday, and next year we'll do Monday this year, but we won't do Saturday. So there's got to be a huge education component in there so that people aren't totally confused, because
I think adding
it will be difficult.
Adding the mandatory Sunday is increasing, right? Increasing the access that first year, which gives you that whole year to do the education on the Monday piece, is what I was saying.
Right.
So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Mr. Hammett? Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry, it's not really a question for Mr. Hammett, but I have a little bit of concern about allowing the counties to have the option between Saturday or Sunday. I mean, am I understanding that correctly, that's as the bill's currently written?
As the bill's currently written, all it does is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Heim, because I frequently am, that it just says that you can't accept the ballots after Sunday. And then it leaves it up to the counties to do, they could do Saturday, Sunday, they could do nothing. They could do just Saturday. Yeah, so all it says is you can't keep taking ballots after that Sunday as opposed to the Monday as is in the statute now.
My concern is it is not at all unusual for voters to move over the county line. Like in my area, it's very easy to stay in the same school district and move over the county line. So if you're used to living in Sedgwick County and they always have early advance voting available on Saturday, and then you move over to Butler County and they only do it on Sunday, that's going to create confusion.
I don't want to start working the bill now, but I would say that that's currently the situation, right? This bill that has no impact on that, because right now, you could go to Wyandotte and vote on the weekend, then you come to Leavenworth County and you can't. So that's currently the case. But all right, any other questions for Mr. Hammett? All right, thank you very much. Committee, I'll direct your attention to written opponent testimony. We've got 3 conferees that have submitted written testimony: Mel Neal, Rashanae Hamby, and Nathan Madden. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as an opponent to this bill? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2512 and open the hearing on House Bill 2516. Mr. Heim, could you please refresh our memory?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill deals with independent nominations of candidates. And it says, all nominations other than party nominations shall be independent nominations. I know there's the Republican and the Democrat, I think Libertarian, and no labels. So there's 4 parties that this would not affect. So this bill provides, the current law says You need not less than 5,000 signatures in order to be, have an independent nomination. This would be, increase that to not less than 25,000 signatures. And the second change is in, on page, another section of the law dealing with filing fees. And this bill on page 3 would say no independent candidate for statewide office shall have the option of paying a filing fee. In other words, they'd have to do it by nomination petition. It is for a statewide office, by the way, is what we're dealing with.
Great. Are there any questions for Mr. Heim? Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is not an option currently to pay by filing fee as an independent statewide officer, is it?
Is that correct? You got your answer. Yes.
That's my answer. I'm just confused why we need to have that language in here.
I'm not sure why is it redundant? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that again.
I've missed you, sir. I've missed you. Representative Neighbor.
With the breakdown that you just gave us, I'm having trouble understanding why we have this bill or why we're bringing it forth. And I hope that through the testimony, we will learn something that will educate us on this, because seems to be kind of where we are now, except for the
It increases the number of signatures from 5,000 to 25,000. Is that correct, Mr. Heim?
That's it.
Yeah. So,
correct.
Yeah. If you're an independent candidate filing, that's a pretty significant change. But is there any other questions for Mr. Heim? Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hopefully you know the answer to this, maybe not, but I've lost track of how many days you would have to gather the petitions. Do you start after filing, or?
Again, you've got experts here, and I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. So
When our conferees come up, I believe that our first oral conferee has the answer to the one's place. Yes. Any other questions for Mr. Heim? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. So committee, I have proponent testimony written only from Representative Mason, who asked for the bill to be introduced. I'm not tracking anybody here to speak in person. Is there anybody who wishes to speak as a proponent to the bill? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to neutral testimony, and our the only conferee I've listed is Mr. Barker. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State. We're neutral on this bill because we believe it's the legislator's prerogative to set the amount of public support for an independent candidate to get on the ballot by the number of petition signatures required. And if you're interested in the history, the last time an independent candidate came close to winning the governor's race or any statewide was 1932. The goat gland doctor, John Brinkley, got 30% of the vote. And there's a lot of statutes that have requirements for the number of petition signatures. Sometimes it's a percentage of registered voters, sometimes it's a set number, sometimes it's a percentage of the votes cast in the last election. And this bill sets the number at 25,000 for statewide. And to put that in perspective, for an independent, and this is just independent candidates, not party candidates, township candidates, 5% of the registered voters with a floor of 10. You need at least 10 or signatures. For a countywide office or a district like House or Senate, it's 4% with a ceiling of 5,000. So a big county like Sedgwick or Johnson, if you're running for sheriff, you only would need 5,000 and a floor of 25. For state at large, currently it's 5,000, which is 0.2% of the votes. And this would raise it to 25,000, which is 1.3%. So the percentage is lower compared to other districts. And Representative, to answer your question, all petitions in Kansas, you have 180 days from the day you get the first signature on the petition to the day it's filed with the office. And smart petition gatherers will always get a buffer, more signatures than they need, and they'll always go through it and hunt for any signature that might have had a typo or a date that's too early and just line it off, because the law is pretty clear. 180 days, if you go beyond that, the entire petition's void, and we have voided them before. The process, briefly, so you understand it, is the petitioner will bring in, and this 25,000 will be some banker's boxes of petitions, give it to the Secretary of State. Mr. Caskey's staff will go through each page, give it an individual page number, and these petitions are organized by county, and count the number of potential signatures on each page. They don't verify the signatures. As long as that potential number is above the threshold of 25,000, they ship the different petitions off to the counties, and the counties have to go through each line and verify the voter. Make sure that's their signature, that they're a registered voter. You get rid of the Mickey Mouses and things like that people sometimes sign petitions with. Then the county sent it back to us, and as long as the number of verified signatures exceeds the threshold, Mr. Caskey will announce that the individual is an independent candidate and will appear on the general election ballot. We had 3 points on this bill. First is going from 5,000 to 25,000, and in reality, you'll end up with about 30,000 probably petition signatures. That will take a lot of time. Currently, we have 20 days. The entire process should take 20 days from filing the petitions to the approval or disapproval. That's normally doable, except the practical reality is most independent candidates will file on the deadline, and the deadline is Monday before the primary. And that's called the sore loser rule, so you can't lose a primary and file as an independent on Wednesday, which means the counties and the Secretary of State are trying to run the election at the same time they'll have this huge amount of petition signatures. And I put it in my testimony, but we'd request a minor change that would push that deadline back to the date of the state canvass. That way the primary winners and the independent candidate are all announced formally on the same day, and that would give us enough time to handle that. Second, the fee provision that was brought up, you're correct, Representative Miller, that's probably redundant, that independent candidates must file by petition. Party candidates can do petition or the self-declaration form. And that provision is really in the Campaign Finance Act, so the Secretary of State and the governmental ethics can take a small fee for the work they do. And last, I'll just bring up 2 issues that have come up with large petitions for independent candidates. First, a lot of voters in Kansas don't realize that there's a statute, it's 25216, that says if you sign an independent candidate's petition, you cannot vote in a party primary. And if you're challenged, you have to sign an affidavit that says, I have not signed an independent candidate's petition. And I don't know what that would have done if there would have been a lot of challenges. At the last election, there wasn't. People aren't really aware of that statute. And it's often overlooked. And second is we've had anecdotal evidence, I'm not going to point any fingers, that when you have large numbers of signatures for petitions, the candidate or sometimes other organizations will have to hire out professional circulators. Those guys are often paid, often they're out of state. They're the ones when they come to Johnson County, you got to teach them it's Overland Park, not Overland Park, and Olathe instead of Olathe, so they don't sound like they're strange, but they will. Sometimes if they're paid by the number of signatures, if they don't reach their quota for the day, they are incentivized to put fake signatures on there, which means you get a higher level of rejections, more work for the counties. It's just the nature of the business. And I'm not accusing anyone of that, but just anecdotally, we've noticed that. And that's the end of my testimony, Mr. Chair, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Are there any questions for Mr. Barker? Mr. Minority Leader.
Well, I learned something else today, and that was what you just mentioned on signing an independent petition, then not being eligible to vote in the primary. Is that if you sign for one candidate's petition, you can't vote at all, or just on that race in the primary?
The statute provides for challenging a voter, and then it gives you a form affidavit that says, and part of it says, I have not signed the nominating petition of an independent candidate for any office for which candidates are voted on at the primary election. So if there's a governor primary, you weren't supposed to sign the independent candidate's petition.
So that, what you're saying is they can't vote in any of the primary races if they sign an independence?
That's the way we read it, Mr. Chair. This is only if a voter's challenged at the polling place, like someone says, that guy should not be voting, then the voter can sign this affidavit that says,
Nonetheless, that seems very harsh.
I just bring it to the committee's attention. Sometimes there's, especially with the election code, there's these collateral unintended issues that get brought up.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Representative Oropeza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barker. How much would this increase the cost for the counties? Increasing 20,000 signatures to verify?
I don't have an answer for you, Representative.
So, Representative, we do have a fiscal note on this, which I believe is zero, but they may have been thinking just about the cost for the state, and I don't know how. Yeah, but we do have a fiscal note that says zero on this.
That takes into consideration verifiers and then postal.
I don't know that that's the case, so we can get you an answer from the. But I would look at the fiscal note that's in the S drive and online, and if you still have a question after that, we can get research to get a hold of. Yeah. Are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barker, I think you made a comment earlier in your testimony that I didn't quite catch, which was that the 5,000 vote requirement in Kansas is 0.2% of all votes, and that is actually a lot lower than what most other states do. Did you have some data on what other states the average independent candidate threshold is?
No, Mr. Vice Chair, I did not look at what other states do, but we can. Again, it varies even in the Kansas statutory code, whether it's a percentage of registered voters, percentage of people that voted in the past, or just a fixed number.
So I'd ask the research, did we do that report as part of the interim committee on what the thresholds are in other states? We didn't? Okay. All right. We'll hunt that down.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Barker? This might be a question for you. This might be a question for Mr. Caskey, if he'll indulge me. I'm not sure. But how many voters vote typically in statewide primaries, Republican and Democrat? What's the normal turnout? Do you have any estimate, round number?
Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of factors into that, including like this year in the 2024 primary, there is no statewide candidate. There's no U.S. Senate, there's no statewide. So compare that to 2020, it really depends on two factors. One, are there any contested primaries that will draw attention? And two, do both parties have contested primaries? So I have overseen elections where primary turnout was in the low 20s, and I've seen it close to 40. But it really, in my opinion, candidates in contested elections drive turnout, and it's hard to just pop up a number. It really ranges.
It could be, the low number would be like in the 20,000.
20%, not
20%, which would be hundreds of thousands of people.
A couple 100,000. Yes.
Okay, so to the question by one of the representatives that what's the reason for this? Well, a Republican or Democrat would have to get the votes of hundreds of thousands of people, whereas somebody can just get 5,000 people to sign a piece of paper and they're on the same ballot. That I think is the intent. Is there any? Yep, Representative Underhill. Sorry.
I just wanted to point out, thank you, that the fiscal note that's attached with all the testimony is an incorrect fiscal note, but the fiscal note with the bill page does show that there's a zero cost to the state and counties.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, I don't have any other neutral, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Chairman.
If I may, the question on having an absolute number versus like a percentage, like 1% of all the votes versus a fixed amount. In most, I mean, my memory is that in most cases, like on a local level, it's more of a percentage that's used. Is that correct?
Mr. Vice Chair, it depends on the petition. It could be like a new party has a different rule. I think it's 5% of the last governor vote versus a fixed number like this. And others are, for instance, if there's a primary election where there's no candidate, if you get a percentage of the party registered vote, you can get on it. There's different formulas for different races.
But if I may, it is more common, is it not, that it's a percentage number and not like a fixed, you know, like 100 votes or 1,000 signatures or something?
My recollection of the statutes, I think you're right. We could go through them and find all the different petition standards and let you know.
I would appreciate that. I think it would be helpful information.
Right.
Representative Howell, you were almost done. Mr. Barker, go ahead.
So sorry. Listening to everybody else, you know, stirs questions. So just for an example, since we had one so recently, in the recent governor's race where we had an independent candidate, I guess I assumed that when they turned in that petition, that was, since it was a statewide race, that was counted or verified, those signatures were counted and verified actually by the Secretary of State's office, not individual counties. Was that an incorrect assumption?
I believe so, Representative. Mr. Caskey's crew will go through it initially to make sure there's enough signature attempts and that every page has a unique number, because sometimes this ends up in litigation. We have to be very careful. And then it gets farmed out to the counties to actually verify the signatures and the registered voter status, because they're the ones with the access to Elvis. I mean, we have it also, but our staff would be too small to do 30,000 signatures. And then each county will send a certificate back saying, this is the number of signatures we verified, and this is essentially the number that were not verified. So the
Okay,
burden really falls
that's a
on-
much more complicated process than I envisioned. So good to know. Learned something new today, just like the minority leader.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, thank you very much. So I have no other neutrals listed. Is there anybody else wishing to testify as a neutral on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to opponent testimony. And the only in-person conferee I have listed is Mr. Hammett from Loud Light. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm honestly a little surprised that I'm the only opponent to this here to present. So as has already been mentioned, the part is redundant because candidates don't have the option to pay to get on the ballot. And that's important because if you're a member of a party, you can pay to get on the ballot. But independents have to use the signature process. They don't have any other option. And so with this, 5,000 signatures is you know, not an insignificant number, and making it 5 times that amount. I think this is a reoccurring question I ask on these bills, but why? What is the point of this? Especially when you put this into the context of, you know, I was doing the just quick math in my head, but I think, you know, we just got a new political party in Kansas, the No Labels Party, and I think they needed 2% of the 2022 turnout, right? Of what? Of the governor's turnout, which I think would have been less than 25,000. Yeah, so it takes less signatures to make an entirely new political party than it does to run as an independent under this bill. And, you know, I don't know each of y'all's journey, but I know a lot of people and even legislators in this building that their party affiliation is sort of what you have to do because there's so many structures in place that make it so difficult for people to run as independents. And over 550,000 Kansans who are registered to vote are unaffiliated. They choose not to affiliate with a political party. This is a burden on anyone, any Kansan who wants to serve, who wants to answer the call for public service, but does not want to affiliate with a political party. And it plays into a bigger story that we've seen over the last, you know, probably the entire state's history, but I've witnessed over the last decade of sort of any time there's something, to be frank, outside of the Republican and Democratic Party where a movement starts, new laws get passed that shut it down. Political parties have tons of advantages. Political parties can bypass contribution limits by putting them through county parties and state parties, and the contribution limits become higher. And you can put tons of money in where an independent and an individual candidate couldn't actually do that. They adopted the sore loser rule that makes it so that someone who lost on the primary can't declare as an independent and still run. And now we already have this requirement that if you want to serve as an independent and statewide office, you have to go out, get these signatures, have them verified, wait an extended amount of time sometimes to even know if you're going to be able to run a campaign. They are waiting until the state canvass to know if they can start their campaign. So really, this bill is just yet another way to consolidate political power in political parties when increasingly the nation and Kansans are really rejecting affiliating themselves with political powers. For us, this is especially a youth issue, as more and more young voters, as we've seen the trends, don't really like to be associated with a political party. They might lean one way or the other, but they don't want to be associated with a political party. So we oppose this because it's really about consolidating political power and rejecting or limiting what types of Kansans can answer the call for public service. I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hammett? Mr. Vice Chairman.
No, Mr. Hammett, I think you raised some interesting points. I guess my one question, or well, one or two comments would, but it is the case that given the fact that, of course, historically in America, certainly since whatever the Civil War, you've had just, the Republican and the Democrat Party as far as being the main contenders. I mean, the populists and progressives, different groups have had a decade or two of maybe some cachet. But the advantages to political party, I mean, it's pretty equally dispersed. If you're a libertarian, if you're the new No Labels Party, I mean, the comments you made, is it not just a fact of just being somewhat organized? I mean, and of it's not inherently something Democrat or Republican, but it just applies to any sort of organized group. And I guess, I mean, as much as you're suspicious of this, I suppose, it doesn't necessarily benefit the Republicans or Democrats any more than it does the Libertarians or the Green Party or, the No Labels folks, would it not?
I think that is conceptually fair, although I would say because of the history of everything, like the Libertarian Party of Kansas, No Labels is brand new, but the Libertarian Party of Kansas, it's not like they have the robust infrastructure that's set up. And I'm not going to get into this because I understand this can get into like ethics and, campaign violations, but my understanding is not an uncommon practice for, a big donor to be able to just shoot a ton of money across all the county parties and the state party and then funnel it through to the candidate. And, as long as it's not sort of said pro bono, or sorry, quid pro quo, then it's not illegal. And so like the infrastructure is not there. But I think to your point more broadly, it's a weird position to put someone in to say that it will take less effort for you to form a brand new political party in the state, and then you can just pay the fee to run for the political party than to just be able to get on the ballot as an independent, not affiliated with any political party.
Just one follow-up question. Of course, everybody here present are House members, and I'm not sure if you would know, I mean, perhaps Clay Barker would, but for someone to run as an independent for a House race, they have to get a certain amount of signatures, do they not? I mean, there is a requirement, and I think it's definitely less than 0.2% of all votes. I mean, is this not just sort of making a statewide level somewhat, more to like what we're used to already, on, somebody running as an independent candidate, for the Kansas House? I mean,
so I think this is 2%, right? Or would be over 2%. You know, I'm not really sure, I'll be honest, that between this committee and the Senate, there's everything possible across the very big election statutes has bills affecting it, so I haven't been able to get as in-depth with the context of this bill. You know, as was mentioned, like a specific percentage may make sense, but in this context, you know, just the bill, this flat number, quintupling the amount of signatures you need, no even verbal proponent, so we really don't even understand sort of the logic of how this came together, seems like a bad start for the bill.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I appreciate that.
So I'll correct the record. We did have a proponent. He wrote written testimony. He couldn't appear because he's chairing a committee right now. So it's not that he doesn't believe in the issue enough to come and appear. He's got responsibilities for his committee. So I am, one of the things that I try to do in this committee is I try to make this a platform where people are going to be able to get like completely accurate information. And so I feel it's this isn't an attack on you, but I feel it's my responsibility to correct something you said. You said that a Democrat or a Republican could pay to file and get on the ballot. That's true of a primary, but this independent candidate is collecting 5,000 signatures to get on the general ballot. To get on the general ballot as a Republican or a Democrat, you can get on the primary ballot by paying, but then you have to stand for election and compete potentially against another Democrat or Republican for the right to be on the general ballot with a guy who just went around and got 5,000 signatures. And, you know, I bring this up because it's public record. Several news outlets have reported on this. The last independent candidate to run for the governor's race, he had people from one of the parties collecting his signatures for him with the intent of making him a spoiler for the other party. And so I think, you know, having talked to the person who asked for the introduction of this bill, I think that's the concern he's trying to address, is that this low threshold creates an environment for shenanigans. And we heard this in the interim committee on elections as well, that this threshold's a lot lower than in a lot of other states. So I take what the vice chairman said to heart, that maybe the threshold should be the same as it is for these other independent candidates in other races. But I will submit to the will of the committee when that time comes. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would put in one alteration to that, is if you have no opponent, you do not have to do anything but pay the fee. And there are a number, if you go down the list, of representatives and senators who do not have an opponent, and some of them for many, many years. So I agree with what you said, but we have to be fair on the other side, because they don't have to do anything else either.
I mean, you know, I think to my point, you stood for that election and nobody else in the party felt that they needed to step up to challenge you. So you got the consent of a large number of people, you know, across your party to run. So if, you know, I can't remember if Governor Kelly had an opponent, but if she didn't have an opponent, that is a tacit acknowledgement by the statewide Democrats across the state that they like what she's doing and they would like her to be their governor again and they would like her to be on the general ballot. So that I agree, like she didn't have somebody who potentially could have taken her off the ballot, but that was in its own way the consent of a huge number of people, hundreds of thousands of people, that said that they like what she's doing and they would like her to continue to do it, I guess is what I'm saying. So,
may I just
please
respond,
do.
to your comment, because I do appreciate that, and there is clearly a distinction between the primary and general. They are different things. I would mention again that we do have this weird structure where you could make a political party that you're running on to get on the general ballot, and there's these workarounds. And I think what this is sort of missing, and would not be, I think, appropriate right now, but for an interim committee or something of mentioning, is that there's, if the issue is how our elections are structured, there are alternatives, right? And I mention this because I'm about to have to write testimony against a Senate bill that's being heard next week that is trying to ban ranked choice voting, even though we don't have ranked choice voting in Kansas. But there are alternative systems that can address these problems as long as we, first specify, like, what are we trying to address? Is there a better system that can be developed to address that? Because ranked choice voting, frankly, some of these concerns, it would address this. That independent would have been eliminated, and then people would have been able to pick their second choice.
So I'll ask you a question now that I'm done having my soliloquy there. So if we were to, you raised several times the example of it's easier to form a party than it is to get on the statewide ballot if we pass this. Right now it's orders of magnitude easier to get on the ballot as an independent than it is to have a party. If we were to change this bill to make the thresholds the same for both, would Loud Light be in favor?
The threshold the same for
being a statewide candidate or being a party. If the signature threshold were the same, would you be on board?
I don't know. That's a very interesting proposition, but I still don't. I don't know. I would have to think about that. This is, as this was presented, I'm sure for all of you, it was kind of an unexpected bill and concept that, again, if the state is really going to move down to addressing this, probably deserves a more thorough kind of conversation of the overall process of which we elect our statewide officials.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Mr. Hammett? Okay, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for inspiring a very interesting conversation. Okay, committee, I have 3 opponents listed that have written-only testimony. Matt Clark, Carrie Sue Vosberg, I hope I'm not butchering that, and Brett Anderson. I would open the floor if there's anybody else present who wishes to speak as an opponent on this bill. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2516. So committee, that's the scheduled work for today. I just want to give everybody a heads up on what is coming down the line. I'm waiting on some amendments on the bill that we heard yesterday on, or last time on the use of paper ballots for auditing. But I hope to be able, and there is the amendment, and so I hope to be able to work this at our next meeting on Tuesday. Not this, the paper ballot auditing. We will I'll have conversations with the vice chairman and the ranking minority member, and we'll decide what we want to do with these other 2 bills that we've heard today. But next week we've got we have the agenda published. On Tuesday, we're also going to be hearing House Bill 2517 and House Bill 2511, which in different ways, let's see, I'm sorry. 2517 is about not having the treasurer on the attribution statements, and 2511 is about the option of putting your party on a municipal ballot. We'll hear those bills, and then Thursday is AI Day. We're going to hear a bill on House Bill 2559, which is about expanding the definition of corrupt political advertising to address this issue of AI being used in a less than honest way to impact elections. And also 2576 has been added, if you haven't seen the amendment yet, which touches that in relation to the signed statement of fair campaign practices. So please take a look at those bills before the hearings. Interspersed within there, we're going to try to work the bills that we can reach agreement on working. And I will give you a heads up so nobody's ambushed, but I can tell you I expect that we will be working House Bill 2504, the bill on paper ballots. We will be working that on Tuesday unless something that I am not expecting occurs. So is there anything for the good of the order? Representative Berquist.
Yes, just for clarification, 2517 and 2511, and what other bill for future consideration?
So 2517 and 2511 is Tuesday, and then on Thursday is 2559 and 2576, and those are for hearings. The agendas, that just came out, we just got the bill number for that last one.
Thanks, sir.
And then we'll be working 2504 on Tuesday, God willing, and the river don't rise. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Okay, if not, we are adjourned.